Hello students, this is your history lesson. Today we are going to read chapter 6 Hindu-Muslim Unity 1912 to 1922 from Understanding History for class 8. So we start our lesson. This is page number 42 from your book. In the 1920s, the Muslims and the Hindus joined forces to pressurize the British government to give self-rule to the Indians. World War One had just finished and the Indians had helped with money and men in the war effort with the hope that they would be rewarded by running their own government. However, the British were as yet not prepared to give up their colony. Mr. Jinnah as ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity 1912 to 1920, a Bombay lawyer, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, had joined the Congress and did great effort to bring Muslims and Hindus on to a common national platform. As a Congress member, Mr. Jinnah was greatly influenced by Dada Bai Nauroji, a Parsi Congress politician, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Up to 1910, Mr. Jinnah took active part in Congress politics, but in 1910 he was elected to the Viceroy's Central Legislative Council on a Muslim seat even before he had joined the Muslim League. The Waqf Validating Bill 1911. In 1911, Mr. Jinnah introduced his first legislative power to make laws, the Waqf Validating Bill, which was accepted by the British government 2 years later. In 1894, all gifted Muslim property had been taken over by a government mayor to be given in charity. Mr. Jinnah said that this ruling was opposed to the fundamental principles of Islamic jurisprudence. Jurisprudence, the study, knowledge, or science of law. He won the case, and it was a certain triumph for the betterment of those Muslims who had lost their property when the gifted or Waqf property was not acknowledged by the British rulers. Here, triumph is a great victory. In 1913, Mr. Jinnah joined the Muslim League and busied himself in bringing the two organizations, Indian Congress and Muslim League, onto a common platform. Mr. Jinnah's first appeal to the League was to put aside the insistence on communal representation for the time being. However, the League members were insistent that the Congress must accept the principle of separate electorates for Muslims in the Lucknow Pact of 1916 to show unity with the Muslim League. The Lucknow Pact 1916. Mr. Jinnah's efforts bore fruit, and the Congress and the Muslim League decided to hold a joint session in Lucknow in 1916. The Congress, apart from conceding here means admit or agree that something is true after first denying. Conceding separate elections, also agreed to introduce them in the Punjab and central provinces. The League said it would uphold the principle of swaraj or self rule, which the Congress now demanded of the British rulers. The Congress and Muslim League cooperation in the Lucknow Pact was the first political settlement between the Muslims and the Hindus. It paved the way for further unity when Gandhi decided to unite with the Muslims in their struggle for the restoration of Khilafat in the Ottoman Empire and started the non-cooperation movement Satyagraha in their support. Both Hindu and Muslim organizations hoped that this pressure on the British government would make them give in to their demands for Indian independence. Mr. Jinnah's efforts and success in bringing the two main parties on a common platform earned him the title of Ambassador of Hindu Muslim Unity. The Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms of 1919. However, circumstances made the British Indian government come up with further reforms for representative government by 1919. With the outbreak of World War I, Indians had helped Britain with war effort with nearly 1 million Indian soldiers serving abroad in Europe and Africa. By 1917, the chances of an allied Britain, France, and Russia forces victory looked dim. The British government wished to pacify Indian demands for autonomy. Autonomy here means the right or condition of self government. When Edward Montagu replaced Mr. Chamberlain as Secretary of State for India, he decided to take measures to bring in reforms for further Indian participation in the government through decision making. Mr. Montagu made the following famous declaration: the policy of His Majesty's government, with which the government of India are in complete accord, in the increasing association of India's in every branch of administration and the gradual development of self-governing institutions with a view to the progressive realization of responsible government in India as an integral part of British Empire. The proposal decided by Montagu as Secretary of State and Chelmsford as Viceroy became the Government of India Act of 1919. Under this act, the Viceroy was now to be advised by six members, three of whom had to be Indians. The Central Legislative Council was greatly increased and made into two houses: Legislative Assembly consisting of 144 members and Council of State or Upper House consisting of 60 members. The system of diarchy was introduced at the provincial level with reserved and transferred subjects. Diarchy here means government by two independent authorities, especially in India. The provincial councils were given control over Indian education, agriculture, health, local self-government and public works, transferred subjects. The British retained control over military matters, currency, communications and criminal law, reserved subjects. The franchise for voting. Franchise means the right to vote in public elections. The franchise for voting was extended but still based on property qualifications and linked to the amount and type of tax paid. There were reserved seats in all the provincial legislatures for religious groups, i.e., Muslims, Sikhs, and Indian Christians. Diarchy, also spelled as diarchy, meant that power was divided between the Indians and the British, but only at the provincial level. It had taken the British 10 years to shift some of the decision making from the center to the provinces, thereby involving Indians in the government of their country. The reforms of 1919 proved disappointing to the Congress leaders. Their expectation of self rule was not fulfilled. Instead, the system of diarchy was devised. Devised means plan or invent to give political power to the Indians in successive states. The Congress rejects the 1919 reforms, although there was a semblance outward appearance of Indians controlling the administration at the provincial level. The reforms of 1919 left much to be desired. The actual power still rested with the British government, and most Indians were not ready to accept the devolution. Devolution to transfer or delegation of power to a lower level. devolution of power on a trial basis as offered by these reforms. The Indian National Congress rejected them and did not take part in the first elections held under the Act of 1919. The hierarchy proved to be problematic as funds made available had to be sanctioned. Sanctioned here punishment by the British authorities. The separation of ministries was not clear as Indian education was with the provinces, but Anglo-Christian education was still with the center, as self rule had not been recognized. Unrest and disturbances continued, especially in the Punjab. From 1919 onwards, Hindus and Muslims openly opposed the British government, especially after the passing of the Rowlatt Act in March 1919 and the Jallianwala Bagh incident of 13 April 1919. The Rowlatt Act 1919. Immediately after the end of World War One, the British Parliament decided to pass a bill as Bengal, Bombay and Punjab had become area of revolutionary means changes activity which had to be controlled. The Rowlatt Act was passed and enforced in India in March 1919. This act came as a huge shock to the Indians who had done so much to help Britain in World War One. The Rowlatt Act curbed here, restrain or keep in check the freedom of individuals to stand up for liberty of thought and action. It allowed imprisonment without trial, trial by judges without a jury. Jury here means judge, no right of appeal, censorship, and house arrests of suspects. No political activity could take place as meetings and processions were not allowed. Mr. Gandhi immediately showed strong opposition to the stifling of civil liberties through this act. Here, stifling means of hot or of air or room very hot and causing difficulties in breathing, or we can say suffocation or suffocating. Mr. Jinnah resigned from the Imperial Legislative Council in protest against the Rowlatt Act. Students, Rowlatt Act was which gave powers to the police to arrest any person without any reason. The Jallianwala Bagh tragedy at Amritsar 1919. When the Rowlatt Act came into force, it led to a tragic loss of life of innocent, defenseless people who had come out to protest against this act. On 13 April 1919, more than 5,000 people had gathered in the Jallianwala Bagh at Amritsar, where the newly appointed officer General Dyer had banned all public meetings and processions in the city. When news of the gathering reached the authorities, General Dyer drove into the Bagh and ordered his soldiers to fire at the unarmed crowd. There was no escape for the unfortunate people as there was only one narrow entrance to the Bagh. The death toll was 379 and 1,200 were wounded. General Dyer showed no compassion. Compassion here means a strong feeling of sympathy and sadness for the suffering of others, and said it was his duty to enforce the law and prevent another rebellion like that of 1857. Rebellion here mean violent action organized by a group of people who refused to accept their government's power. He was called to account by the British government, but though found guilty by the Hunter Commission, he was not penalized. In fact, he was eventually hailed as a hero who had shown loyalty to the British Raj. The sentiments of the Indian people were ignored with irreversible consequences for the future of the British in India. Opposition to British rule and demand for self rule became the firm goal of the Indian people. General Dyer and the crawling order. Crawling creeping. General Dyer ordered that anyone who used the street on which Marcia Sherwood had been beaten would have to crawl on all four along it in mud and filth. The act was repealed to withdraw formally soon after, but the damage had been done. When the 1919 reforms were announced, the Indians did not take them seriously and demanded that more should have been done towards giving them dominion status. It was clear that living under an oppressive foreign government was no longer possible. The Indians must now pursue freedom and independence from British rule. The Khilafat movement 1919 to 1924. The Khilafat movement in India supported the cause of Turkey and its ruler, the Khalifa, as the head of the Muslim Ummah worldwide, and whose protection was the duty of every Muslim. The Indian Muslims demanded from the British government fair treatment for Turkey after the war was over. A Khilafat delegation including Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Ali brothers, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, and Mr. Gandhi met the viceroy in Delhi, but without any assurance. The same year, a group including Muhammad Ali Johar, Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi, and Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad also left for England to meet the Prime Minister Lloyd George, but were unable to do so. The Treaty of Sevres had already carved up the Ottoman Empire into mandates to be administered by the Allied victors Britain, France, Italy, and the USA. Despite the pressure of the Khilafat movement in British India, the Turks who had defeated the Greeks asked for a different settlement. Mustafa Kemal Pasha in 1924 exiled the Khalifa, exiled here to send someone away from their own country, village, etc. Abdul Majid II, the Khalifa Abdul Majid II, and abolished the Khilafat, abolished, formally put an end to a system, practice, institution, etc. Turkey was reformed on nationalistic lines, and the Ottoman Arab lands were surrendered on the League to the League of Nations as mandates of Britain and France. The Khilafat movement, deprived of its cause, came to an end in India, but it had taught important lessons to Indian Muslims. They became politically active and learned to use their voice for addressing Muslim demands. The Ali brothers, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, were very active in the Khilafat movement in India and also in the cause of self rule. They had studied at Aligarh, and Shaukat Ali had been the captain of the cricket team. He joined his younger brother Muhammad Ali in the publication of the journals Comrade and Hamdard, and in 1915 to 1919, Shaukat Ali served a prison sentence along with his brother for inciting Indian Muslims against the British to protect the Khilafat in Turkey. The same year, he was elected president of the first Khilafat conference held in Delhi in November 1919. He was deeply interested in Islam and devoted to the cause of freedom. He also helped Mr. Jinnah in his efforts for the Muslim League. Muhammad Ali Johar was a great orator, speaker, and writer. After graduating from Aligarh, he went to Oxford for higher studies. Through his English journal Comrade 1911 and Urdu journal Hamdard 1913, he supported the cause of Turkey and the Khilafat in India. After his release in 1919, he continued the struggle for the Khilafat, and he was tried and sentenced again in 1921. The Ali brothers' trial was held at Khaliqdina Hall in Karachi. Despite poor health, Muhammad Ali Johar attended the first Roundtable Conference in 1930 as president of the Khilafat Committee and spoke strongly in favor of Indian Muslims. He felt India was now Darul Harb or land of war. Muhammad Ali Johar died in January 1931, soon after the conference. According to his wish, he was buried in Jerusalem as he did not wish to return to India and be buried in a slave country. He is considered the greatest Muslim leader of the 20th century before the emergence of the Qaid-e-Azam. The Hijrat movement. In 1920, 18,000 Muslims, mostly from Sindh and NWFB, tried to migrate to Afghanistan as they felt that India was now Darul Harb, as described by Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad and Maulana Abdul Bari. They sold their land and properties to go and settle in a land governed by Muslims, but the Afghan government, unable to accommodate such a large number, accommodate mean to provide with a place to live or to be settled or stored in, asked them to return. The Hijrat movement ended in failure, and most of these migrant Muslims lost faith in the Khilafat movement too. The non-cooperation movement 1920, Mr. Gandhi collaborated means work jointly on an activity or project with the Muslims in the cause of the Khilafat and decided to lead the non-cooperation movement at the same time to strengthen the cause of Indian independence from Britain. Thus, it became a joint struggle of the Hindus and Muslims after their collaboration in the Lucknow Pact of 1916. The movement of non-violence and non-cooperation meant that the Indians would give up the titles and position given to them by the British government and boycott British schools, colleges, courts, and consuls. A word of caution came from Mr. Jinnah, who felt that Indians should not pull back till they set up alternative institutions. The non-cooperation movement came to end with the Chori Chora incident in 1922 when police fired at a gathering of demonstrators. The crowd retaliated, make an attack in return for a similar attack. Retaliated by attacking the police station and setting fire to it. 22 policemen lost their lives in the incident. Mr. Gandhi immediately called off the movement as he believed in non-violent means to gain political ends. Now come to the questions. Question 1. How did the Congress and Muslim League form a pact in 1916? Answer. The Congress and Muslim League cooperation in the Lucknow Pact was the first political settlement between the Muslims and the Hindus. It paved the way for further unity when Gandhi decided to unite with the Muslims in their struggle for the restoration of Khilafat in the Ottoman Empire and started the non-cooperation movement Satyagraha in their support. Both Hindu and Muslim organizations hoped that this pressure on the British government would make them give in to their demands for Indian independence. Question 2. Why was the Khilafat movement started by the Ali brothers? Answer. The Ali brothers, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, were very active Khilafat movement in India and also in the cause of self-rule. Shaukat Ali served a prison sentence along with his brother for inciting Indian Muslims against the British to protect the Khilafat in Turkey. The same year, he was elected president of the first Khilafat conference held in Delhi in November 1919. He was deeply interested in Islam and devoted to the cause of freedom. He also helped Mr. Jinnah in his efforts for the Muslim League. Question 3. Explain how the Hijrat movement became a cause for the failure of the Khilafat movement. Answer. The following means contributed to the failure of the Khilafat movement. An incident known as Chori Chora played a vital role in the failure of the movement. Main leaders of the movement were imprisoned. Question 4. Why did Mr. Gandhi decide to start his non-cooperation movement? Answer. Mr. Gandhi collaborated with the Muslims in the cause of the Khilafat and decided to lead the non-cooperation movement at the same time to strengthen the cause of Indian independence from Britain. Thus, it became a joint struggle of the Hindus and Muslims after their collaboration in the Lucknow Pact of 1916. The movement of non-violence and non-cooperation meant that the Indians would give up the titles and positions given to them by the British government and boycott British schools, colleges, courts, and councils. Question 5. Explain Mr. Gandhi's decision to call off the non-cooperation movement. Answer. The non-cooperation movement came to end with the Chori Chora incident in 1922 when police fired at a gathering of demonstrators. The crowd retaliated by attacking the police station and setting fire to it. 22 policemen lost their lives in the incident. Mr. Gandhi immediately called off the movement as he believed in non-violence means to gain political ends. Question 6. How successful was the united front of the Muslims and Hindus in the early 1920s? Answer. From 1919 onwards, Hindus and Muslims openly opposed the British government, especially after the passing of the Rowlatt Act in March 1919 and the Jallianwala Bagh incident of 13 April 1919. Mr. Jinnah's efforts and success in bringing the two main parties on a common platform earned him the title of Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity. In the 1920s, the Muslims and the Hindus joined forces to pressurize the British government to give self-rule to the Indians. Question 7. Why was the Rowlatt Act hated by the Indians? Answer. The Rowlatt Act curbed the freedom of individuals to stand up for liberty of thought and action. It allowed imprisonment without trial, trial by judges without a jury, no right of appeal, censorship and house arrests of suspects. No political activity could take place as meetings and processions were not allowed. Question 8. How did the Rowlatt Act lead to the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy? Answer. When the Rowlatt Act came into force, it led to a tragic loss of life of innocent, defenseless people who had come out to protest against this act. On 13 April 1919, more than 5,000 people had gathered in the Jallianwala Bagh at Amritsar, where the newly appointed officer General Dyer had banned all public meetings and processions in the city. When news of the gathering reached the authority, General Dyer drove into the Bagh and ordered his soldiers to fire at the unarmed crowd. Question 9. What effect did the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy have on the Indians? Answer. The sentiments of the Indian people were ignored with irreversible consequences for the future of the British in India. Opposition to British rule and demand for self-rule became the firm goal of the Indian people. Thanks for listening. For new videos, don't forget to subscribe my channel. And if you like my videos, please share and like.